Chapter 3. I never left the freighter. With nowhere to call home and no other family to go to, I decided to play house on the ship. I managed to avoid the relief shuttles when they came to collect the refugees and stow away in an air vent. I managed to find a defunct inlet off one of the main ducts, and after a few nighttime salvage missions for clothing, supplies, and makeshift bedding, I managed to set myself up a small encampment. After that, it was just a case of nightly raids on the canteens, storage areas. That's the beauty of air ducts. It gave me safe passage all over the ship. Of course, to make sure that I could put vent covers and gratings back the way I left them, I had to borrow a few tools too. Over time, I even managed to fix parts of the inlet I was in, replace the filters here, tidy up the wiring there. I'd always been quite handy before all of this. Now it just became something to take my mind off hiding and having no one else to talk to. I never had an ultimate goal. No idea where I was going to go, what I was going to do. It was always my plan to leave the freighter and make myself a new home, but as the years went on, it just became harder and harder to leave. 2 years since I first boarded the freighter had passed, and I'd been running low on food. A maintenance party had been working on panel repairs just down from the vent I used to sneak in and out of the storage rooms. Sometimes I was able to get out after they left, other times they worked all night. It had been 4 days since I'd last been on a supply run, and even my water was running low. I was out of options and out of choices. I had to make a break for it. There was no way I could get past the workers, but I'd been in the ducts for long enough to find loops and areas that might have taken me out of their way, but ultimately led me back to where I needed to go. I managed to work my way around the workers and through an older area of the vents. It was part of a secondary storage system little used. Excess spare parts, old tools, broken equipment, nothing that seemed of any use to the crew. As I crawled through the duct, the dust and dirt on the floor kicked up like a billowing dust trail behind me. The air here was breathable, if a little thin. Even though the air to this section wasn't closed off, it was clear someone hadn't been here in a long while. I couldn't hear any voices echoing through the cavernous air ducts, so I assumed there must be no one nearby. The only thing I could hear was the creaking of old metal, long since neglected. A creaking which became louder. That suddenly turned into a splintering, screeching crack as the duct and myself crashed down 12 feet to the floor. The crash resonated around the empty storeroom, the shelves underneath being crushed by the falling duct and sending long-forgotten tools and equipment to the floor along with me. I lay there for a few moments, waiting to hear the sounds of people running to investigate the noise or an alarm to sound, but nothing happened. Picking myself up, I looked around in the gloom to see if I could find a way back up into the vent. Unfortunately for me, the only way I could reach the vents now lay in a twisted heap of metal on the floor. If my mental map was correct, I was only just around the corner from a wall vent on the other side of the doors that would lead me back into the vent. The only thing I had to do now was to get through a door that hadn't been opened in God knows how long. Luckily, with all this equipment around, I could easily be able to salvage parts to fix up the door console. I'd done enough repairs and improvising to find a piece of metal that would fit the screws holding the door console panel to the wall. More than once, I've always thought it would be a great idea to have some kind of automatic pocket screwdriver. It would make things a lot easier, but for now I was going to have to make do with making something from what I had around me. It didn't take long to get the panel off the wall and get to the wiring beneath it. I squinted into the dark recess, trying to make out the state of the wiring, but it was too dimly lit to see. Luckily, with all these spare parts and machines around me, it didn't take long to rig up a small light source from various diodes and parts. Able to see into the wiring now, I could see that the issue was simply a mere disconnection between the circuit board and the door lock controls. At the time, I was so preoccupied with getting free that I didn't think of how obvious a trap this was. There were mechanics on this ship that could rebuild a star drive from scratch, so why would they just leave a minor wiring disconnection? If I had really been paying attention, I would have noticed that the wire wasn't just disconnected, it had been cut. I managed to use wire from the stripped apart machines to reconnect the door controls. The door groaned, shuddered, and started to move. I could see light from the outside corridor start to beam in through the crack, illuminating the dust in the air. Then the door panel sparked, the smell of burning metal filled the air, and the door clunked to a halt. Clearly my wire rigging hadn't been as good as I'd hoped. However, I'd be able to get the door open just far enough to get my fingers in between the door and the frame, and using all the force I had, I pushed. I knew I was weakened by hunger and thirst. I didn't think the door would move that far. So imagine my surprise when the door flew open and I landed on the floor. Glad to be free, but my happiness only lasted a few moments, as I realized in front of me were several pairs of work boots.
Well, well, well. I guess you owe me 5, John. Looks like we do have an extra mechanic on board.